The second generation Mercedes GL was launched in September 2012 as a 2013 year model and would become the GLS in 2016 when the company changed the naming convention of all SUV models. While this second generation was wider, taller, and longer than the previous generation, it was also 100 kilograms or 220 pounds lighter in a direct spec for spec comparison, although options can make these heavier. For many, a GLS will be between 2,380 kilograms or 5,247 pounds and top out at 2,505 kilograms or 5,523 pounds for a higher spec, larger engine model. Now, unlike the GLE of the time, there is no hybrid options, and the engine lineup that we'll come on to later in the guide is fairly simple with 3 petrols and 1 diesel. A fun fact for Americans, though, is that the diesel engine was offered until 2016 when the car was facelifted, although it was still a relatively rare choice. There was marketing for a facelifted diesel model in the USA, but it looks like it didn't get a full rollout, and so while a few GLS 350Ds may have sneaked through, I couldn't find any for sale. Australians should note that the diesel engine along with a petrol V8 was offered alongside the top-end AMG model, but the V6 petrol was not largely exported, as Mercedes figured most Aussies would prefer a diesel if not choosing a higher power model. A similar idea was shared in the UK, where almost all GL and GLSs were either diesel or AMG. Now, the Middle East follows closer to the American supply with both the petrol V6 and V8, along with the AMG. Diesels were factory order only, and buyers looking for the widest variety should note that 2013 and 2017 were the standout years for sales across global markets, but 2016 and 2014 weren't too far behind. Mainland and Northern Europeans got the widest choice with all engine options available, but the diesel was still a popular choice for many. It doesn't matter which model you go for, you will get the airmatic suspension, while only select markets, excluding the USA and Canada, were offered an off-road package including a centre diff lock. The UK and some European countries were offered this, and Australians could option this package to include further underbody protection, but in most markets it was rare and was only given a fixed number of build slots at the factory, as so few chose to have the off-road package. I should add, it was technically possible to ask a dealer to make a factory order in the USA, even though it wasn't in the brochure to have this specification, but as best I can see, no one did. No matter where in the world you buy your GL or your GLS, it would have been originally constructed in Alabama, although the knockdown kits for reassembly were sent across the world, including to Thailand and India, although the caveat here is that the Chinese version, called the BAIC BJ90, was built under license in China and was mainly built for the Chinese government. Specification varies across the world markets, so I'll do a quick roundup. First, in the USA, there are no set trims like in Europe, and so any options can be fitted as long as there is not an engine limitation. Packages that are optioned include the Premium Pack with panoramic roof and soft closed doors, then the Park Assist Pack for Park Pilot and Surround View. There is then an appearance package which upgrades the wheels and running boards, and a lighting package adds adaptive bi-xenon lights, and a night package gets gloss black styling and AMG style wheels on some models. In Europe and in the UK, there are named models like the popular AMG Sport and AMG Line, along with the Designo. Any of the trims with the AMG name on it get the sportier look and upgraded wheels, while Designo focuses more on interior trim. There are additional packages offered, usually called the Premium Packs and Premium Plus. These add the 360 camera and memory seats, but generally the GL and GLS were only sold with high equipment levels, so there wasn't as much to add on as there was in the USA and Canada. Germany got a few lines just for themselves, including the exclusive interior package, which differed from other markets, while the night package was a popular pick in the UK and Europe, especially on the facelift GLS model. Australians and New Zealanders generally got a specification somewhere between Europe and the USA, so there were packages including the Sport Pack, Entertainment Pack, and Anti-Theft Package, along with the AMG Line 1 and 2 option and the Night Pack. Now, in the Middle East, specification is closer aligned to the USA with packages rather than trim lines. However, many distributors opted only to have highest end specification, with the AMG line and Night Pack for appearance the main distinguishing factor, as most are already fully loaded, so it comes down to exterior look and choice. A quick note here is that a handful of countries got a late special edition called the Grand Edition in 2018, which was a popular pick in India, as well as the UK and Germany. Now on to safety, and there was no official crash testing done by European NCAP or North American IIHS, so I can't report on this one, but its BR166 platform is essentially a stretched version of the GLE, which was tested and scored a top safety pick award. Now onto the common faults, and a reminder to consider subscribing if enjoying the video, and as ever, a massive thank you to the channel members for their support of this channel and the ability it gives us to cover cars that may not perform that well on the platform, but I know are useful to many of you. Viewing a GL or GLS early in the morning before it's been driven is advised to check for any overnight sagging at the rear. The airmatic suspension is a fairly complex system, and a first sign of failures is usually the rear dropping overnight. The rear air springs were the number one culprit, but the valve block or the compressor could also be at fault. You may not see the rear drop if the compressor is just starting to fail, but you will likely feel during a test drive that the suspension doesn't quite glide as you'd expect. A common dash warning for the auxiliary battery can either be a fault of the backup battery or the voltage converter, and while frustrating, shouldn't keep you off the road for too long. Any low-speed shudder on models with a 7G gearbox can be helped by a software update matched to a gearbox fluid change. The exact number of cars affected is hard to pin down, but this is something that several owners reported before having a specialist, quote-unquote, work their magic. The plus is that it's rarely a major hardware needed for the repair, but it still requires several hours of work to sort it out. Those first three were the ones I found most common, so this next group are a little less heard of. Any creaking from the panoramic roof is almost always fixed by a specialist adjusting the fitment and then adding lubricant to the rails. The power tailgate led the way for non-urgent faults, with the latch or strut refusing to operate. A low voltage battery can knock out the module that needs reflashing. Other times the car needs a complete hard reboot to get the module controller for the tailgate to talk to the rest of the car. While this needed few parts to resolve, it usually took hours with dealer level diagnostics to fix, so unless your specialist works fast, the bill can be more than you expect. If fitted with active curve systems, then a low pressure warning will usually reveal a seeping reservoir. Mercedes did a revision to the cap on later models and recalled some of the older cars, but some owners still report the problem today. Then we move on to the lesser reported issues, including a transfer case vibration that was mostly noted early on and dealers appear to have dealt with under warranty. Then LED daylight running lights suffering a fault with the control modules due to a failure. The answer is usually a new module. Then the rear camera can get stuck in place, which affected several Mercedes models and is usually a software or calibration issue rather than broken hardware. I'll note that none of these issues were guaranteed, and several owners have had minimal issues with their GLS, although if I were to single out a common cause, the auxiliary battery seems to be the root cause of many faults, so making sure this is in good condition and changing it early for a new one if you have any suspicion it's running low would be prudent to avoid further issue. Next up are the recalls, and a reminder if you are enjoying the video to add a like, or even the new hype feature to a video, as it helps get it suggested to others. In 2016, there was another single recall, this time for the axle carrier bolts not properly assembled at factory on 2015 built cars. In 2017, there were 3 recalls, the first for the center console unlatching in a crash, the second due to a limited number of windshields needing replacing after having work done to the center console, and then water ingress found on 2017 built cars on the steering assist EPS control unit, which was then replaced under the recall. In 2018, there were 2 recalls, the first due to headlights reporting a configuration fault out of tolerance, essentially blinding other cars. Then, as mentioned earlier in the common fault section, there is the issue with the active curve system or ACS needing a revised oil cap. In 2019, there is a single recall for the 2013 to 2019 built cars due to a fault with the e-call system misreporting locations, and so a software update was carried out. And now onto the engines, and as I mentioned earlier, you'll have less choice on the larger GLS and GL than its smaller siblings, the ML and GLE. but that doesn't mean it doesn't give you a good selection of choice with a European specification of 3,500 kilograms towing rate shared in Australia. In the USA, this is quoted at £7,500, which translates to a slightly less 3,402 kilograms, but this was likely for simplicity and marketing purpose rather than a physical difference of 100 kilos or 220 pounds. We'll start with the standalone diesel engine. These are badged either 350 Bluetec on the earlier GL and then GLS 350D on the facelift cars. In Europe and several other key world markets, excluding North America, this engine runs from the start to the end of production. The 3-litre OM642 put out 255 brake horsepower and scored an official average of 38.2 miles per gallon, or 7.4 litres per 100 kilometres in Europe, and 31.8 miles per gallon score in the USA. Owner feedback was much broader in Europe, where this was a popular choice, although Europeans will want to note that the GL model prior to the facelift is on the older Euro 5 emissions schedule, and only the very last built before the facelift comply with Euro 6 regulations for city driving restrictions. However, UK and European buyers may want to note that some earlier 2015 cars have the correct equipment to get the low emissions charge exemption as the 2016 model years. Overall, owners love the torque delivery and long-range cruising comfort of the V6 diesel. However, there are a few key areas to check for possible issues. The one that many have said was much more expensive than they thought was the oil cooler seal failing and causing a leak. Access to the area is under the intake manifolds, meaning that while the actual part cost is low, the labour cost is high, and confident home mechanics usually try this one themselves. Swirl flaps have reports of jamming in place, but injection hardware for the AdBlue system are a more common complaint and can be caused by several different failure points. The advantage here is that you should get away with some warning on the dashboard for emissions equipment failures. Unfortunately, turbo actuator failings are a much harder to tell on test drive unless they have completely failed, which will cause black smoke and zero boost. But if buying a high mileage example, it may be worth speaking to a specialist about checking the turbo actuator and the fuel injector seals. If you catch these early on, you'll still be out of pocket for a repair, but critically, you won't have the laundry list of other issues to fix at the same time, especially as the turbo actuator issue can then cause further emissions equipment problems if left to fail. Overall though, while there are areas to check, and if you run them to high mileage, they'll likely need a few things replacing, owners with thorough servicing history have gone past 200,000 miles and said that the engine was the least of their concern. Now let's move on to the petrol engines, and it's here many US buyers will find the widest selection. The range begins with the GL450 model in 2013. However, for simplicity, I'm going to mention this model later as it shares the V8 engine with the 550 model that ran until the end of production. So in 2014, a GL400 model was introduced. This would then become the GLS 400 and features a V6 biturbo engine coded M276. This made 329 brake horsepower initially, but a higher power option was added with 362 brake horsepower on the facelift for the GLS 450 nameplate, as it needed to fill the shoes of the 450 V8, which was being discontinued. US data on fuel economy shows 24.5 miles per gallon or 9.6 litres per 100 kilometres scoring, but owners generally get a bit less than this unless highway cruising the majority of their miles. The M276 engine has a fairly robust reputation and is used in the entry AMG models on other Mercedes vehicles, including the GLE43 AMG. However, you should still look out for an oil leak from the timing gear and the cam covers, and there was a small number of reports indicating a failure of the timing gear can be caused by a worn cam adjuster throwing the system out of tolerance. This will usually give a notable rattle when starting the engine from cold though, before it causes a major issue. It is also worth asking to see if the camshaft position sensor has ever been replaced, as the seal for this has failed on several Mercedes fitted with this engine. Back to that GL450 in the pre-facelift models, and this engine is shared with both the GL550 and the GLS550. The M278 is a V8 biturbo engine producing 362 brake horsepower in the 450, and then 429 brake horsepower in the GL550. The engine then gets a boost to 449 brake horsepower on the facelift GLS 550. Fuel economy varies slightly on official testing between the 450 and 550, but 19 miles per gallon or 12.3 litres per 100 kilometres appears a fair score that is achievable outside of city traffic. Unlike the smaller V6, this engine did have a few hotspot complaint areas, and while it can reach high mileage, you'll need a bit more care and attention to get there. The biggest concern for many was reports of high mileage cars showing cylinder wall scoring and marks causing a loss of compression. Owners reported this after 100,000 miles, and cylinder 1 and cylinder 5 are the most effective in our research. If you're trying to spot this on a test drive, you want to listen out for any faint knocking noise or a misfire, which can be harder than you expect to notice on these larger engines in such a big car. If this is clear, then the valve guides on early engines and oil pump drive gear are something to check service records for. The valve guides appear to be sorted on the facelift in 2016, but the oil pump can affect all years. Then there were the lesser issues, including an oil leak, which can come from the rear main seal. A more expensive job than you'll expect, but with less chance of causing greater issues than the others, as long as it isn't left for too long. One top tip is the camshaft sensors usually get changed by prudent owners early. Specialists know that these can fail and will let you know when they get to the point where they're better to change while they're still working than waiting until they fail. After this, there is the most powerful model, the GL63 AMG and GLS63 AMG, both equipped with the M157 V8 BiTurbo. This 5.5 litre engine gets a power rating of 550 brake horsepower, but is pushed to 577 brake horsepower on the GLS facelift. Unsurprisingly, fuel economy is not this car's strong point, and an official 19.1 miles per gallon or 12.3 litres per 100 kilometres is a bit optimistic. The one advantage with the M157 is that while it certainly isn't perfect, many owners find that it is standing the test of time and mileage. Any startup rattling sound will again direct attention towards a timing chain issue, usually a stretched chain that, if caught early, can be repaired simply with replacement and recalibration. The key issue that many owners battle with this model is heat buildup, although the GLS suffers less with this than some other Mercedes models, thanks to the size of the engine bay, offering at least some space for ambient air to pass through. There were also some high mileage cars reporting the same bore scoring as the 550 model, although as the 63 AMG model is sold in a smaller number, it's harder to tell how common this issue is as a proportion of those on the road. When on test drive, listen for any signs of a misfire, as this may lead you to a larger issue with the ignition system. If you are keen on the AMG model though, look out for a concise maintenance history. The best kept examples of these seem to last well. On to our picks, and on a budget, the Diesel 350 makes a strong case for itself, especially if you intend to carry several adults along with you or tow, as the surge of torque masks the vehicle's weight well. If the diesel isn't of interest, then the V6 petrol in the 400 not only gives reasonable power and efficiency, but has built a good reputation so far, and so while you won't pull away from the lights as quickly as those in an AMG, you should have lower running costs. If the GLS isn't for you, we've recently covered the GLE model, or you can find this car's direct competitors like the Range Rover and BMW X7 buyers guides on the channel to check out next.